Hey, what's up guys? Hello to Footballtalk here. Alright, we are back on YouTube after putting out a piece on the biggest rises in college football 2 weeks ago and then taking last one off due to taking a 3-day trip. But I'm locked into the NFL once again and seeing that week 9 banner, which indicates the midpoint of the season, it's kind of a wake-up call and I did a lot of research for this video. Do we know exactly who all these teams are? No, but we should get a pretty clear picture by now, and this is an interesting slate of games. The Thursday night matchup won't excite too many people, but there's a lot of divisional games or intra-conference games between teams that don't face each other many times. It also includes my number one game when the schedule came out, even if one of those teams doesn't come in with the same kind of glamour we expected, and one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the league was just ruled out unfortunately. Before we get into the slate, I want to quickly remind you that all the betting lines that I mention here are from the book I use as it stands Wednesday morning, and they'll of course change to some degree still, with news coming out about players being ruled out. And another reminder, all my social media outlets are listed in the video description if you want to get even more content and or get in touch with me, so make sure to check those out. Getting back to this week 9 however, we have 4 teams on their bye week, all from the NFC, the Detroit Lions, Washington Football Team, Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Seattle Seahawks, and let me quickly discuss them. For the Lions, they have been battling in pretty much every game until I said they might win this last week against the Eagles, and they got absolutely destroyed at home. They needed this break, but I'm not sure if there's a W on this remaining schedule. For WFT, the most disappointing team of the season for me so far. Sure, Ryan Fitzpatrick barely played at all for this group, and I based my opinion largely on the upgrade that he would present on the center, but the defense has been awful, and they have pretty much blown any chance that they had. The Bucs were just handed the second loss of the season, and the first game an opponent was able to make Brady look bad. I still think this is one of the toughest offenses to match up with league-wide, and the defense gets a chance to get healthier I would think. And finally the Seahawks, they were involved in another game that I label as a potential upset against the Jaguars, but them in Detroit taught me a valuable lesson to never bet bad teams again, since Jacksonville got stomped up in the Pacific Northwest and made Seattle look like a juggernaut. I still think as long as Russ is out, they are a highly flawed team. But with that, let's get right into the slate. With Thursday Night Football, the 2-5 New York Jets at the 3-5 Indianapolis Colts, Indy favored by 10.5, total set at 46.5. And it still doesn't feel like it, but if the Jets were to pull off another upset, they'd have the same record as the Colts and actually be ahead of them in terms of seeding, not that it would likely matter for either team in that case. The Jets come into this one off an emotional high, having beat the recently 1-seeded Cincinnati Bengals, led by backup quarterback Mike White, making his first career start, to go along with another upset win over Tennessee, which are completely out of context compared to the rest of the season, since they've been outscored 151-53 outside of those 2 games. While there's a couple of teams in that range that have played an extra game, the Jets have scored less points than any other team in the NFL, and only the Chiefs of all teams have turned the ball over more often than them. And it's kind of crazy that they scored 34 points last week in that upset win, considering backup quarterback Mike White checked the ball down 20 times to his backs, and he throws the ball 3.1 yards short of the sticks on average, which has moved him in front of the competition, so to speak. They're also the only other team not in Atlanta without a single run of 20 plus yards. Gangrene's defense has allowed points on exactly half of their opponent's drives, and the 37 plays of 20 plus yards against them is the second most in the league, but they've shown some positive signs considering how often they've been put in unfavorable positions off turnovers by the offense, as opponents start drives beyond their own 35-yard line on average, which is about 3.5 yards further ahead than the next closest team. They're tied for 6th in average yards against the run, however, at exactly 4 flat, and are at least average on third downs and in the red zone. The Colts on the other hand had their upswing kinda crushed by the Titans, beating them in overtime to take a commanding lead in the AFC South with that season sweep. After they have been gaining some momentum recently, they're still alive for a wildcard berth, because I think the team is good enough, but they're about to enter a monstrous second half of the season and can't afford to lose this one. Jonathan Taylor is the star of the show for this team offensively, as he ranked behind only the 2 Cleveland running backs with 2.8 yards after contact on average, and he averages 4 yards more than any other player in the entire NFL after the catch, even if that home run screenplay at the start of the Ravens game heavily influences that number. Second-year man Michael Pittman has turned himself into one of the most complete receivers in the whole league, and his quarterback Carson Wentz is substantially better than he was in 2020, limiting those plays that get him in trouble, where he's trying to be Superman and puts the ball in harm's way. even if he flashed it this past Sunday with the overtime interception against the Titans. Switching over to the defensive side of the ball, it's kind of odd that they pressure the passer on a league low 16.3% of their dropbacks, but that they're still tied with the Bills for a league high 18 takeaways on the year. DeForest Buckner is playing out of his mind right now, and the speed on the second level is pretty much unmatched, but the loss of rangy safety Julian Blackmon on the back end is big, and the corners are highly vulnerable, as quarterbacks are top 5 in completion percentage, passer rating, and first down percentage against them. I don't think the Colts will be able to just pound the rock at will against King Green. Joe Mixon got into the end zone a couple of times against them last week, but he averaged less than 2.5 yards per carry on the day. I expect another big Michael Pittman day, as long as Frank Reich moves him around a bit and doesn't allow Robert Saleh to easily bracket him. The Jets, on the other hand, will have to open up the offense a little bit, because Indy knows Mike White's tendencies now of dumping the ball to his backs, and with the combination of Leonard and Okereke hustling around, it won't be very fruitful to follow that same strategy. I'm personally still waiting on the Elijah Moore breakout. In the end, I believe the Colts will be able to at least force the Jets' backup quarterback to get out of his comfort zone, and then a well-balanced offensive approach will allow them to put together more sustained drives consistently to slowly grind away a 10-point win. Colts 27, Jets 17, nothing really that stands out from a betting perspective. And with that, I want to dive right into the Sunday slate, starting with the 1 p.m. games, where we have the 3-4 Atlanta Falcons at the New Orleans Saints at 5-2, New Orleans favored by 6, over-under set at 42.5. And both of these teams are coming off games inside the NFC South, as the Falcons lost to the struggling Panthers, and the Saints put a damper on the reigning Super Bowl champions in the Bucs. And I don't think anybody realizes that they're 5-2 now, where a win this weekend would move them into first place for the division, along with a dominant win over the conference leaders in Green Bay in the season opener already. The Falcons were starting to fool some people here, evening their record by winning 3 of the last 4, following an 0-2 start, but those W's have come against the 2 New York teams and Miami. Looking at the statistics, only the Texans have gained less, and the lower percentage of their runs have ended in first downs, without one that was at least 20 yards long. Matt Ryan has played a lot better than he did to start the year, but now with Calvin Ridley handling his personal situation, and I just wish him all the best. Who is there really to fear for them, outside of all-rounder Cordarrelle Patterson and rookie talent Kyle Pitts, who has been on tear recently? For the defense, their 10 sacks on the season are the fewest in the league, and no other team surrenders more than the 3 first downs via penalty on a weekly basis. Grady Jarrett's once again sneaks underneath the radar as a frequent visitor in the backfield and having made plays in key moments. But defensive coordinator Dean Pease has had to learn how young, inexperienced personnel can really limit what they're doing on that side of the ball. For the Saints, they have the 7th best point differential in the league, winning by almost exactly a touchdown per week, and they also have the 4th best turnover differential at +4. Despite the belief being Jameis would maybe bring some more variance, but also big play potential through the air, they really lack explosiveness, as they are the complete bottom of the league with some distance at only 15 plays for 20 plus yards. Even as a 10-year veteran, I believe Mark Ingram can give them that bruising RB2 to complement Alvin Kamara, but this offense really doesn't scare you with their weapons, and they heavily rely on the big offensive line, which might only be enhanced now that Jameis is out for the year. As we turn things around, I think they have the best run defense in the entire league, with big guys up front, and Demario Davis as a demon between the tackles, hunting everything down recently. And it also reflects in the stats, where they're tied for the fewest yards per carry at only 3.5, along with the Browns. They have 3 legitimate cover corners and smart safeties, and they're also the best red zone defense statistically, holding opponents to just under 44% in terms of cashing in possessions for 6. So it's about the defense and run game getting to the 4th quarter with a lead, and the 27.5 yards per kick return also lead the league, despite not having taken one back to the house yet. So as I think about this matchup, the Falcons just won't be able to run the ball at all, I would think, and I don't see an advantage for them in the pass game, other than maybe Kyle Pitts, who could see a heavy dose of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson in slot. Once again, no one lacks dynamic abilities on offense, but Sean Payton should manufacture enough to create issues for a struggling Atlanta defense, and he's shined in the past putting together game plans for backup quarterbacks. I expect the Saints to slowly break the will of the Atlanta defense with a heavy load of cleverly designed screen passes, and if Taysom Hill is available, he could be the guy to deliver that final blow. And Demario Davis should be affording Matt Ryan's eye when he blitzes up the middle and puts shots on him. So I have New Orleans up by 7, with the Falcons having the final drive, and Ryan flinching as he throws a pick. So given the Saints 24-17, covering that spread and barely going underneath the total. Which brings us to the next game here, the first inter-conference one between an AFC and an NFC team, as the Denver Broncos at 4-4 traveling to Dallas to take on the 6-1 Cowboys. Dallas favored by 9.5, total set at 49.5. The Broncos along with the Panthers were the teams in the biggest freefall coming into last weekend, having lost 4 straight after the 3-0 starts respectively, but Denver was able to win a defensive-oriented battle against Washington at home before trading away a defensive stalwart of the last decade in Von Miller. While the Cowboys came away with a big win on Sunday Night Football without Dak Prescott on the center, as the defense really stepped up and Minnesota let them hang around before taking the lead late. As of this moment, we don't know the status of the starting quarterback, but riding that 6-game winning streak after nearly knocking off the reigning champs in the season kickoff game, Dallas has a lot of momentum coming into this one. The Broncos have certainly been limited offensively, with Teddy Bridgewater being pressured on nearly 30% of his dropbacks, and only Chicago surrendered more than the 26 sacks on the year. And while he has been a little more aggressive this season, he still hasn't offered much that isn't served up to him anyway. However, they did get Jerry Jeudy back from IR, who made an immediate impact for them, and I hope they finally put a larger part of the load on rookie running back Javonte Williams. Melvin Gordon nearly fumbled the game away against Washington this past Sunday, and just doesn't have that extra gear anymore. While only 3 running backs have broken tackles at a higher rate compared to the rush attempts than Williams. The defenses was kept as a competitive team even when they were losing, as only the Bills have given up less than 17.1 points per game, in part to keeping teams out of the end zone half of the times that they get down in the red area, and having one of the most well-rounded secondaries in the entire league. And I think I've brought this up every single time with the Broncos, but I think it deserves recognition here, being the fact that they've missed the fewest tackles on the year at like 3.5 per week. For the Cowboys, even with just a 20-point performance without Dak last week, they're averaging 32.1 points per game, which is the third most behind only Tampa Bay and Buffalo, and they're also tied with the Rams for a league-high 6.5 yards per play. Top to bottom, you could argue that they are the most well-rounded team on that side of the ball, with about a 55-45 pass-to-run split, but more importantly, a diversity with giving the ball to guys already in motion, different run schemes, quick game, play action, and design deep shots of looks that they present earlier in games. Offensive coordinator Kellen Moore really is in a groove right now. As we look at the opposite side of the ball for Dallas here, teams have been able to move the ball on them for the most part, but they're drastically better than they were in 2020 in key areas, as their second best in third down percentage surrendered at just 31.3%, including holding the Vikings to 1 of 13 this past Sunday night, and they're not tied for third with 14 takeaways on the year, so they're very opportunistic and situationally good unit. The one bad stat for them, they're the only team to get flagged more than 8 times per game. This heavily depends on if the Cowboys decide to rest Dak for another week or not. If he's out there, this won't be too much of a contest, I think, but even with Cooper Rush, if he's allowed to play within himself, Dallas probably has the advantage at home. The Broncos are not going to fall into a trap of allowing this defense to take the ball away multiple times, because they can put together some extended drives if allowed to use a balanced style of offense. And on the other side of the ball, the Cowboys offense will have to be patient, not allowing those playmakers on the back end for Denver to play with their eyes on the ball. With the secure tackling, we won't see as many easy yardage on run after catch type of plays for Dallas, but when I get down to it, and considering what a warrior Dak is, wanting to be out there, and the line movement reflecting that, I assume that they can just kick it into another gear that Denver can't. So given the Cowboys winning 30-20, which again is right around the numbers that we have here, and I'm telling you, I did not look them up beforehand, because like I said, they actually changed on the day that I put together his graphics, so maybe you'll have to wait a little bit longer for one of our betting nuggets. But now let's move on to another AFC and NFC showdown with 2 4-4 teams, as we have the New England Patriots traveling to Carolina to take on the Panthers. New England favored by 3.5 on the road here, over under set at 41. And no lot of people wanted to write off Bill Belichick and the Patriots following their 1-3 start, but they've now won 3 of the last 4, and in the one that they lost, they still at least took one of the best teams in the Cowboys to overtime, and now have 3 500 or worse teams on the slate coming up. The Panthers did finally get back into the winner's circle as they stopped their 4-game losing streak following a surprising 3-0 start to the year, but they were involved in the Deshaun Watson trade talks and just didn't feel like the team that we saw hammer the Saints in week 2 at all anymore. With the Patriots, like I mentioned in my weekly video breakdown, which I highly suggest to check out in my social media outlets, if you're into run schemes and out-leveraging box counts, New England is far from a juggernaut offensively, but what they do is create and attack weaknesses by their opponents, and they find ways to stay on the field, converting 35% of their third downs, being behind arguably the 5 best offenses in the entire league. And I was absolutely shocked to find out that only the Buccaneers have put up more than the 40 plays of 20 plus yards on the season. The defense may not be as dominant as we've seen at times in the past, but they're still top 10 in all the key statistical categories, like points allowed, turnovers, and red zone percentage. They still have one of the best secondaries in the league, and they find ways to manufacture pressure while not giving up a lot of cheap yardage, making opponents work for every single inch. That overtime loss to the Cowboys is still the only contest in which they've given up more than 24 points, and that's a number that you should really win with consistently in today's game. And the Pats are also now first in the Halilsville Football Talk special statistic, as they are beginning drives 6.4 yards further ahead than their opponents on average. The Panthers have now dropped to 30th with just 4.8 yards per play on offense. Sam Darnold's play has certainly been pretty up and down, getting back to making some head-scratching decisions, but he needs help from his receivers, who have dropped 21 passes, which is 5 more than any other team in the league, and his production as a runner cannot be overlooked, converting half of his rush attempts into first downs and reaching the end zone 5 times. When Christian McCaffrey comes back and they can play through him, I think they can be good enough on that side of the ball to come away with some wins, because the defense is still pretty darn good. The stats will tell you that they're still second in yards per play given up at 5 yards per, and third in holding opponents to just 32% on third downs converted against them, but a lot of that can still be based on a crazy good start to the season. Still, there's a lot of good things that can be taken away with a deep defensive front, the silent range of a healthy Shaq Thompson, and the secondary that now with Stephon Gilmore can really challenge receivers. They also tied for second with 44 tackles for loss on the year and fourth in pressure percentage. This was one of the tougher calls on the weekend for me. I believe there's still enough redeeming qualities to see with this Panthers team potentially sneaking into the playoffs as a wild card, but New England has shown me that they can hide some of their weaknesses while exposing the opposition. Is this the week that we finally see Christian McCaffrey make his return? I believe he will, and he could create some issues for the Patriots' slow group of linebackers in the pass game. Yet, while I like Joe Brady's offense, it's not super complicated, and we've seen Belichick make opponents pay for trying to go 5 out by messing with the protection rules and forcing Donald to see ghosts again potentially. Mac Jones and the offense for New England will have to slowly churn away with the short pass game and forcing Carolina to play defensive fronts they didn't want to by putting out multiple tight ends, similar to what Dallas did to them a good month ago now, to not allow themselves to get into third and long situations and let the Panthers draw up creative pressure looks too much. So I'm going to go with the road team here, winning on a walk-off field goal, Patriots 23, Panthers 20, and we'll just keep this trade rolling of NFC teams now actually traveling to an AFC team, as with the 3-4 Minnesota Vikings going to Baltimore to take on the 5-2 Ravens. Baltimore favored by 5.5, over on the set at 49.5, and I might be the only person on the planet to remember this as vividly as I do, but the snow game between these two teams 8 years ago was one of the most fun regular season contests that I've ever watched. These two teams went back and forth with a couple of big touchdowns from Cordarrelle Patterson early on in his career, but Baltimore won on a late score. Going back to 2021 now, the Vikings come into this one after a Sunday Night Football game against the Cowboys playing with their backup quarterback, where they were better in almost every statistical category, but could not pull away from the opposition just when we thought that they might turn things around to some degree, while the Ravens are coming off their bye week, still pissed about that first loss since the season opener, getting stomped by the Bengals in the later stages of the game. Like I already mentioned, the Vikings were 1 of 13 on third downs last week, and a stat that was brought up on the Pro Football Focus forecast. Yeah, I do watch on PFF content. Only 2 starting quarterbacks currently have a low average depth of target on early downs for the first 3 quarters than Kirk Cousins, which are Ben Roethlisberger and Andy Dalton, and Mike White is now the only guy to throw the ball more than Cousins is 2.8 yards short of the sticks on average. They play games to get to the 4th quarter and just want a chance to win late, even though they could pull away from the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football, for example. They take care of the ball for the most part, as only Seattle has given up the ball fewer than 5 times, but they're just not very effective and have become pretty basic in the offensive play designs. As we turn things around to the defense, there are a few positive statistics for them, like pressuring the quarterback on the 2nd highest rate league-wide at nearly 30%, and also being 2nd in sacks, but they also just lost by far the top pass rusher in Daniel Hunter for the rest of the season. Their starting corners are old and just not very good, and the younger guys behind them have not shown the growth that they would like to see. For the Ravens, a stat that not many people will look at as an indicator for them offensively is having just 5 first downs handed to them via penalty all season long, which is half as many as the next closest team, which speaks to how little they attack outside the numbers and force defensive pass interference calls. It may not seem that way because they do quite a few glance routes and alerts with the RPO game, but Lamar's average depth of target is 1.5 yards further ahead than any other quarterback in the league with at least 20 pass attempts, and they're also top 3 in red zone touchdown percentage, around 73%. Having a whole different set of sort of washed running backs certainly shows in what they bring individually on the ground, but Lamar has been in overdrive, and with rookie wide receiver Rashad Bateman out there now, I think they might have the true alpha out there so everybody else can fall in line. Baltimore's defense has been vulnerable to some big plays, as they're tied with the damn Texans for the second most yards per play surrendered at 6.3. They have to rush the passer as a group and sort of compromise themselves on the back end at times because they don't have that one guy who can consistently beat his man, and their secondary can't take too many hits anymore. However, they've been excellent in situational football as they're 4th and 3rd down and tied in 2nd in red zone percentage. Plus, once they create those stops, they average 3 yards more per punt return than any other team in the league, and winning the field position battle is still a big deal even in today's offense-driven league. The Vikings have the explosive weapons to force Baltimore into playing more coverage potentially, while Kirk Cousins is patient enough to take the easy yardage, and as much as the analytics community won't like it, they're stubborn enough to run into box counts that don't favor them and not get into those long downs. However, looking past any X's and O's, this is a pissed off Ravens team with the Baltimore home crowd behind them, against a team that just had a major issue to convert 3rd downs. Wink Martindale once again has to not get too overly aggressive and allowing his 2 receivers to create some separation downfield from man coverage from Minnesota. But there's a clear advantage on the Ravens side in the analytical department. The Minnesota defense has major issues on the edges, and Lamar presents a dimension as a playmaker at the most important position that Kirk Cousins simply can't match. And this is the first game that I see some clear value from a betting perspective, because after Ravens winning 31-20 and covering twice the 5.5 point spread, I personally bet it already, and I think it's only going to go up from this point, so you might want to get involved quickly. Which brings us to a matchup between 2 division rivals of the Ravens, with the 4-4 Cleveland Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals at 5-3. Home team favored by 2.5, over under set at 46.5. And who would have thought that 8 games in, when these 2 AFC North teams would square off against each other, the Bengals would be in the running for the division, and the Browns would be at the bottom. Both teams lost last week, and Cincy found a way to give away an 11-point lead midway through the 4th quarter against the freaking Mike White-led Jets, having just defeated the Ravens, while the Browns only scored 10 points in a slugfest versus Pittsburgh, and their only win over the last month came by 3 points at home against Denver. The Browns featured a premier ground attack in the league as they fell first with 5.2 yards per rush attempt and with 10 runs of at least 20 yards. Based on that, they also lead the league with a time of possession of just over 33 minutes, and they may be sorta out of sight, out of mind right now, but Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are still 1st and 2nd in terms of yards after contact per attempt, so they can run inside zone, power, counter and so on to create space with the offensive line, but then those guys with the ball in their hands can make the most of it. The unfortunate part is how Baker Mayfield has looked ever since banging up his shoulder in week 2, and how much they rely on yards after catch. I don't freaking care what you think about the guy, but if Odell Beckham Jr. is targeted once for 6 yards, you're doing something wrong, because I can see him open out there. The defense has been much more impressive overall, I would say, for Cleveland, since they're behind only the Bills and Panthers, with 5.1 yards per play on that side of the ball, and is still tied for first with only 3.5 yards per run. Myles Garrett is currently playing as well as any defensive player in football, and is fully capable of taking over games, but I think some of the veteran additions like Anthony Walker and John Johnson III have really paid off as well, to go along with the draft investments to add athleticism to the back 7. The one thing that they haven't been great at is surprisingly only having forced 5 turnovers on the year. But when we flip things around to the Bengals, sure, their loss to the Jets certainly takes some steam off this group, and it illegitimizes some of the things that they've done, but let's not act that this is not a good team. Only 3 other offenses in the league have averaged more than 6.2 yards per play, and they're also tied for first with the Rams with 10 passes of 40 plus yards, with Jamar Chase becoming one of the premier downfield threats among all receivers, and T. Higgins kinda going underneath the radar as well. We saw them overpower the big bad Ravens at the line of scrimmage a couple of weeks ago, and Joe Mixon is leading the league with 14 broken tackles. Defensively, the guys up front for them continue to impress with the way that they can set the tone at first contact, and how they can rotate guys through and passing downs to compress the pocket. They're also currently tied for second with 44 tackles for loss on the year, and they're second in the league with 91 total pressures. Logan Wilson behind that is quietly becoming one of the top linebackers in the game and can clean up all the trash that they create. while they do a great job in coverage of keeping everything in front of them and stopping guys short of the sticks, allowing opponents to just turn further their passes into first downs. And only the Rams have been penalized for less yardage than the Bengals 38.5 per game. Both of these teams have coming off games that raised some concerns and were let down by one side of the ball respectively, which those two units will go up against each other, so something has to give. Cleveland's run game is about to face one of the toughest tests of the season, and Kevin Stefanski will have to create leverages with angles rather than just asking the offensive line to drive guys out of the ball, because that's just not going to happen, I would think, considering the Ravens' backs were held to just 29 yards on 11 tries a couple of weeks ago against Cincy. But more importantly, they have to put their defense on their heels a little bit with their threat of the deep ball, because if they don't have to respect it at all, and those two safeties and quarters can run the alley, they'll have a tough time moving the ball consistently. The key matchup to watch as we flip things around is Jamar Chase against Denzel Ward. The outcome of that one will likely determine who wins this game as well, but I just saw Chase cross up Marlon Humphrey a couple of weeks ago, and really nobody has been able to stop the rookie one-on-one. They'll have to have a plan for Myles Garrett with chips and slides, but Cincinnati doesn't need a ton of time to set up the deep shots. So in the end, I think the Bengals will continue to hit on at least some explosives, while Cleveland hasn't really shown that ability with Baker in the center. I'm going with the Bengals winning 24-20, and if you can grab them at less than a field goal, I think that's a solid bet. And we stay in the AFC with a much less compelling matchup, as we have the 5-2 Buffalo Bills at the 1-6 Jacksonville Jaguars. Buffalo favored by 14.5, total set at 48.5. Wow, this is not a game that I'd expect to last very long in terms of the competitive portion of it. I think the Bills are pretty clearly the number one team in the AFC right now, while the Jags are at the bottom of the conference. We saw the Dolphins keep Buffalo in sort of a 3-3 stranglehold last week before pulling away with 4 straight scoring drives, including 3 touchdowns to end the day, while Jacksonville on the other hand was down 24-0 until just past the 2-minute warning at Seattle last week, in a spot that I actually thought they might win. For the Bills, you can argue all you want about the level of competition that they faced, but they still easily have the best point differential league-wide at an absurd plus 17.1 and a plus 13 in the turnover department, plus their messed up quarterback sneak away from probably having won 6 straight. Offensively, they're not as effective as they were in 2020, but they're still top 5 in points per drive, and they're tied for a league low 8 sacks given up, along with the Rams. I get the whole you don't have to run to be successful in play action, because Buffalo uses it more frequently and for more total yards than any other team in the league, and Zach Moss is more so the late game banger for them. But when Devin Singletary is basically averaging twice as many yards before contact than Moss, there's something he just does better at manipulating blockers and opening up lanes for himself, which should be used more to their advantage. And since I just mentioned the differential for them, they also convert a league best 17% more of their third downs than they allowed their opponents to do, and really the defense has been more impressive from a statistical standpoint, giving up a league low 4.6 yards per play, forcing 18 total turnovers, which is also tied for first, and being the only team to pressure the passer on more than 30% of dropbacks. Really, I could write a whole page about the defense that they'd be number one at, whether it's more basic stats, advanced efficiency numbers, DVOA, you name it. Balanced teams like Tennessee certainly have given them the most trouble, but they are playing at a really high level. Jaguars, when they can play a balanced style of offense and run the ball downhill with James Robinson, they can get the job done, indicated by the second-ranked average of 5.1 yards per carry, but they always get themselves into negative game script situations, and while at 12 turnovers, now only 5th across the NFL, 23.7% of the drives ending in points is still the lowest mark out there, just not being able to convert on third downs, which only Seattle has done so less effectively. Yet you can argue the defense has been even more disappointing, since we've at least seen flashes from first overall pick Trevor Lawrence in the offense. The run defense has been okay, in part of being down a lot and focusing on the run, but they are bottom 5 in points per game and yards per play, and every other team has at least taken the ball away 5 times. Jacksonville has 2. They can't make opposing quarterbacks uncomfortable, as they only have 2 guys in the top 100 in total pressures, and they're letting their young defensive backs experience baptism by fire, with plenty of one-on-ones created downfield, which leads to Miami being the only team to give up more than the 34 completions of 20 plus yards, and nobody allowing a higher passer rating out there. This is simply an extreme mismatch across the board, no matter how you want to look at it. Buffalo won't allow Jacksonville to stay ahead of the chains and run the ball effectively on early downs, especially with James Robinson likely being out in this one. Then they can send waves of pass rushes at them, and muddy up the view for Trevor Lawrence by flooding areas in zone and creating turnovers that way, while the offense should get back on track here as well against a team that won't be able to slow down Manny Sanders, who has become the Bills' designated deep threat, and Stephon Diggs, who could go berserk in this one. I think the Bills will hammer them, and if you can grab them at less than 2 touchdowns, I'd do so, because I have them winning 35-14, covering the spread by nearly a touchdown. Total is not really something that I would look at, unless it's the team total for Buffalo. But now let's go from an extreme mismatch to two of the worst teams in the league squaring off against each other, as we have the Houston Texans at the Miami Dolphins, both went 1-7. My god, I can't remember a regular season matchup between two worst teams in a while, and unless Houston and Jacksonville both sit at just one win when they meet in week 15, it should stay that way for a while. The Dolphins have certainly been more competitive recently, going into halftime all tied up with Buffalo last week and losing on walk-off field goals the 2 weeks prior, while the Texans, until scoring a meaningless 22 points in the fourth quarter of a blowout loss against the Rams backups, were outscored 116-8 since allowing the Patriots to come back against them in the second half. That's just absolutely crazy. Even with those meaningless fourth quarter points, in the destruction at the hands of the Rams this past Sunday, Houston was dead last in points per game, and until scoring those, they hadn't even hit triple digits on the year. Things haven't been made easier on the third-round rookie quarterback Davis Mills, as they average a league-low 3.3 yards per carry on the ground, and they barely cracked the 15% mark of runs resulting in first downs, while Brandon Cooks is kind of the only dependable target on the offense. Defensively, they head of only the Lions and Chiefs respectively in points allowed and yards per play, even if they've at least been able to show some resistance on third and long situations, and in the red zone I would say, plus they have forced a couple of turnovers. Still, they just traded away the best defensive lineman arguably in Charles Omenihu, and they just don't have the pieces at cornerback to match up with a talented receiving corps. For the Dolphins, only the Bears have averaged less than the 4.8 yards per play on offense, despite being second to only the Bucs in pass play percentage at just over 2/3 of the snaps. With Tua back, I like much more what I see in terms of spreading the field and attacking leverages, but the average is 3.8 yards per carry on the ground, and you simply can't kill teams in the modern NFL with 100 paper cuts anymore. You need explosiveness, and turning one of the most explosive weapons in college football in Jalen Waddle into an 8.6 yards per catch guy, which is more than 10 yards less than he had at Alabama, kinda tells the whole story here. Defensively is where they've really let us down, not impressing with their ability to confuse quarterback and protection schemes, forcing bad decisions, but rather getting burned on the back end, but allowing the safeties to get manipulated consistently. The 39 passes of 20 plus yards given up is 5 more than any other team in the league, and Washington is the only team to allow more than the 50% of third downs converted against them. I really don't want to waste too much time on this matchup that nobody wants to watch anyway. I think the Dolphins have the better quarterback, and the receivers present more issues for the Texans secondary, especially Mike Gesicki, who could have a big day against a team that really struggles against the tight end position for fantasy purposes here, but I don't think they should be a touchdown favorite over anybody. So giving the Dolphins 24-20, a game that I would suggest you don't watch at all unless you're a fan of one of these teams. And that brings us to the final 1 p.m. matchup for this week, as we have the Las Vegas Raiders at 5-2, going to New York to take on the 2-6 Giants. Vegas favored by a field goal, over under set at 46.5. And the Raiders to me are one of the most surprising 5-2 teams in the league, rebounding nicely after a 2-game split, following another 3-0 start, winning by double digits at Denver and versus Philly respectively, and they are now coming off their bye week. While the Giants on the other hand have looked a lot better these last 2 weeks themselves, beating the Panthers by 3 touchdowns, and then losing by just a field goal at Kansas City this past Monday night, after their only other win had come on a miraculous comeback against the Saints, and they had found ways to lose games prior to that. Looking at the Raiders here first, despite being second in passing yards per contest and explosive plays through the air, only Seattle has turned the ball over fewer times than the Silver and Black at 5 apiece. Derek Carr is playing at a near MVP level right now, and that's with Darren Waller not being the focal point of the offense at all recently. Still, if the Texans didn't exist, their 3.5 yards per rush would be at the bottom of the league, and of course we can't get around talking about the whole Henry Ruggs situation. Everything we've seen come out has been horrible, and I just hope everybody involved can find some peace here. But this has an effect on the football field as well, because the young man was starting to come into his own, and his vertical prowess was a huge piece to the offense, which they're now missing. Defensively, the Raiders have taken a major step forward this season after a horrible 2020 campaign for them, Splits on a league low 12.7% of plays, but still a tie for 6th in pressure percentage, thanks in large part to a Defensive Player of the Year type of season from Max Crosby, along with some other contributors. Gus Bradley has been a key figure in Las Vegas with the way he's gotten his defense to limit big plays and play with more energy overall, while the additions in the secondary have certainly paid off. They just can't allow opponents to get into the red zone, where they've given up touchdowns at the same rate as the Lions at 83.3%. Giants are a bit of a weird team in general. They have shown that they can compete with some of the very best when totally healthy, but simply haven't been able to make the plays needed late to come away victorious. Without Saquon Barkley, they've been a below average running team, and out of the top 4 receivers, 2 seem to be inactive every single week. Rookie Kadarius Toney is the guy that they need to feature more, because he's shown such dynamic abilities and sparks, and he can truly create separation for Daniel Jones, who has taken better care of the ball and has improved as a progression passer in my opinion, but they settle for too many field goals, as one of only 2 teams, along with the division foes in Washington, to convert less than half their red zone drives into touchdowns. Opposed to what I thought about the Raiders coming off that horrible 2020 campaign, I thought the Giants might be one of the most fun defenses to watch on tape this year. However, they pressure the quarterback on less than 20% of dropbacks, they give receivers too much easy access, and they just don't get off the field consistently enough, as only one team has allowed their opponents to run more plays per drive against them on average. They can play top down and make offenses earn yards against them, which we just saw against the Chiefs, but they need to be more aggressive in key situations and create more stops. I felt strongly about the Giants in a couple of spots this year, picking them against the spread, but I also called the outright win against the Saints, and call me crazy, but I'll do it again here. The Raiders have become a much more vertical passing team, which plays into Big Blue's hands in what they want to do defensively. The big defensive line can take away any threat of the run game, and without Henry Ruggs and the speed that he presents, I think they might be willing to get into the faces of those receivers more, while rushing Derek Carr in a controlled fashion, where he's not really comfortable ever in the pocket, because the interior three get pushed backwards. While we've seen the Raiders have their issues against running quarterbacks, and I could see Daniel Jones have some success on designed running plays to go along with attacking those guys in between the numbers when they spread the field, and letting guys like Toney and company work that space. I think it'll be a close one, but given the Giants in an upset, winning 23-22, I think if you can get them at 3.5, and it should be available later on the week, that's something that I will look at, as well as maybe a sprinkle on the money line. Moving ahead to the midday slate, and this is actually only 4 or 5 kickoff this week, with the LA Chargers at 4-3 going to Philadelphia to take on the 3-5 Eagles. The temperature on these two teams probably changed quite a bit this past weekend, as the Chargers lost at home to the Patriots in an expected bounce-back spot following a domination by the Ravens and a bye to iron out some of those issues that they had, while I actually picked the Lions to get their first win of the season against these Eagles, and they went on to hammer Detroit 44-6. Focusing on the Chargers here first, we've applauded this group for what they did earlier in the year, with young head coach Brandon Staley as the face of this up-and-coming team, while Justin Herbert is running the show on offense and being a team that totally relies on the analytics, but they now actually have a slightly negative point differential, thanks in large part to the blowout loss at Baltimore. Their offense hasn't shown a ton of creativity as of late, with some clear tells about certain formations and a lack of variety in terms of pass concepts, where that shootout against the Browns seems a long time ago now, when you look at the Ravens holding them just 6 points, and the Patriots making everything they do seem hard to come by. At the same time, you can clearly see how the Chargers defense is structured, based on numbers, as they're the only team to give up more than 5 yards per rush attempt, but at the same time, only the Bills have given up less than the 15 plays of 20 plus yards through the air. They run a ton of too high safety structures, and the numbers in terms of limiting big plays through the air speaks for themselves, but I talked about this in my last weekly video breakdown. The actually smart teams will take advantage of very favorable looks in the box and take the free yardage by handing the ball off, rather than saying running the ball is inefficient anyway. For the Eagles on the other hand, their rushing stats are kinda weird because they're top 3 in yards per carry and first with 33% of their attempts leading to first downs, but the only 2 times that the running backs have carried the rock 20 plus times in a game were blowout wins over Atlanta in the season opener and Detroit this past Sunday, as Jalen Hurts makes up for a lot of their production off script, and the passing game lacks complexity with a ton of quick screens, RPOs and singular reads, where Hurts holds onto the ball 0.2 seconds longer than any other quarterback in the league when dropping back, and only 3 teams have converted more than the 72.5% of red zone possessions into touchdowns. Defensively, they keep everything in front of them from a coverage perspective, with a lot of quarters and quarter half, which reflects in them allowing the highest completion percentage league-wide at 74.3%, but just 17 passes of 20 plus yards, which is the 4th fewest in the NFL. The only issue here is that they are tied for a league high 61 missed tackles on the year, so they make offenses be patient against them, but by not being able to bring guys down in space consistently, having true playmakers against them can create some issues. I think this is a spot where you can take advantage of the market being too low on the Chargers and too high on the Eagles. Ellie has gone up against 2 of the top 5 defensive coordinators in the NFL these last 2 weeks, so we're able to put together game-specific plans to take away what they want to do. When they go 4 strong and get Austin Eckler matched up against one of those linebackers, I don't expect those guys for Philly's side to be up for the challenge. And then on defense for the Chargers, we have yet to see the Eagles commit to the run game before actually believing that they will get Staley and company to adjust the way that they want to play them. They have excellent tackles in the secondary to limit yards on those wide receiver screens, and they can match Devonta Smith's speed down the boundary to not get burned on vertical shots. I got the Chargers winning 27-23, and at just 1.5 points, I'm getting involved in this one from a betting perspective. Alright, 2 more 425 kickoffs, and the first one here, oh man, this one hurt. I put together this whole write-up, and I'm going to present it to you anyway, but I'll get to it in a little bit. Because after their embarrassing 38-3 loss to the Saints, Green Bay has now won 7 straight and have outscored their opposition by 8.6 points over that stretch, including handing the Cardinals the first loss of the season on a walk-off interception in the end zone by like the 5th corner, as AJ Green decided to not get involved in the play. The Chiefs, on the other hand, are looking to get back above 500 for the first time since winning Week 1 against the Browns. They barely defeated the Giants at home last week, and they have yet to beat a team above the 500 mark themselves. The Packers are tied for the 2nd best turnover differential in the league at +8 and have one of the most balanced offensive attacks in the league. Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers are operating at an extremely high level right now, while taking advantage of soft defenses by punishing them with the run game and attacking the weakest parts of their opponents by moving pieces around. They don't get behind the chains a whole lot, they utilize the backs in the pass game against slower linebackers, and by having Aaron Rodgers, they can attack every square inch of the field at all times. Defensively, they are tied for 3rd with 14 takeaways on the season. They finally started to create more negative plays to force opponents to get out of the comfort zone, and they've created some spots in the red zone, even if the Lions and Raiders are still the only teams to allow more than the 78.3% of those possessions finishing in the end zone. They're still more towards average on that side of the ball, I would say, but they're bound to get 2 of the best players back in Zadarius Smith and Jair Alexander, even if it may be next week. For the Chiefs, they're still one of the most capable offenses in the league, and when they can stay patient against those deep zone shells that opponents throw their way, they can work their way down the field, converting an NFL best 55% of their 3rd downs. But they've had major issues in pass protection, and with how the defense has been, Patrick Mahomes has been forcing the issue too much, as they are 4 clear of the rest of the league with 19 total turnovers. And as crazy as it may sound, Mahomes currently has the worst on-target percentage of his passes at just 66.3% of the entire league. Like I mentioned, the defense has been absolutely horrible, and they're giving up an NFL high 6.4 yards per play, while also being one of only 2 teams along with the Texans, who are in freefall right now, to rank in the bottom 5 in yards per run and pass allowed. I think the addition of Melvin Ingram will pay off instantly, as it allows them to move Chris Jones back to his more natural spot on the interior, and to make them a more capable pass rush group, where only Atlanta has recorded less than 11 sacks on the season. Defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo will have to work his magic once again, however, to turn his unit around over the second half of the season. As much worry as there has to be about what they've shown this season, I still believe that the Chiefs can turn things around eventually to some degree. There's almost no way that they can challenge for the AFC's top seed or anything like that, with the schedule that is still in front of them. But when you have the most talented quarterback in football, and a defense that has pretty much hit rock bottom, really the only way is up. Yet, this isn't the matchup that I believed they would be able to show that off, because Green Bay is very hard to figure out on offense, and had the whole thing written up about the Packers having enough speed on the outside to not get burned in quarters coverage if those safeties have to trigger down and blah blah blah. And then I checked the line again, googled Aaron Rodgers' name, and realized that he just tested positive for COVID. Fuck. The football gods are cruel, I'm telling you. Taking this matchup with the 2 most talented quarterbacks that I've ever seen from us again, after they already did so 2 years ago when Patrick was hurt, and I even freaking had to change the cover photo. As much as I like LaFleur and he will get this offense to move the ball with Jordan Love on the center, I had to go away from calling this a 27-24 Green Bay victory to taking the home team here, winning 27-20, and I have to say, having to rework this whole thing nearly gave me a flat tire during the last bit of the preparations for this video. But this is how it's going to be, and we're just going to have to hope that this next one delivers, which is an NFC West battle between the 7-1 Cardinals and the 3-4 San Francisco 49ers, where Arizona is coming off the first defeat of the season, and San Francisco finally got back into the winner's circle. Alright, the Cardinals finally lost in a bit of a surprising spot at home against the wounded Packers squad with a head-scratching final play, where I've seen people talk about how AJ Green retired midway through the route, and he's really lucky that he hasn't been thrown under the bus more so for blocking on a play where every single person in the stadium knew that they had to throw it. So now that the whole perfect record thing is off the table, we can focus on what really matters. They're a freaking good team. Only the Bucks, who are on a bye this week, have scored more than the Cardinals 246 points, and the Broncos are the one team that has also played 8 games to have allowed less than a 138 defensively, and that's by 1 little point. Buffalo is also the only other team with a point differential of plus 10 or better, and the Cardinals are at 13.5, and while they may only be 8th and 3rd on conversion percentage, they're the lone team to have converted 100% of the 4th down attempts at 7 for 7. Even with that one loss, Kyle should arguably be the choice for MVP right now, being credited with the highest on-target percentage of his passes by Pro Football Reference at 84.4%, and considering the out-of-structure dimension that he presents. The defense has shown some issues stopping the run at times, as they got a heavy dose of A.J. Dillon right up the gut this past Thursday night, but they're tied for 4th best with just 5.2 yards per play surrendered, and tied for 3rd with 14 total takeaways on the season, as well as having the lowest 3rd and 4th down percentages allowed at barely over 30%. The 49ers, on the other hand, after scoring 41 points on Detroit in the first game of the season, I think we all expected this offense to get back to a certain level under Kyle Shanahan. They've had to overcome a multitude of injuries to the offensive backfield, and George Kittle has now been out since week 4 as well, but they've not been able to get quality play out of the quarterback position outside of the first and most recent game, I would say. Only 2 teams, the Seahawks and Jacksonville, have converted less than the 32.5% of 3rd downs, but at least once they get into the red zone, they end about 79% of those possessions in the paint. Deebo Samuel has been the focal point of that unit, and while he's dropped 3 more passes than any other player, he also has 50 more yards after the catch than any other wide receiver in the NFL, north of the 400 mark already, as an extension of the run game, but also as a big play machine. The San Francisco defense leads the league with 46 tackles for loss, but with Javon Kinlaw likely out for the rest of the year, that certainly hurts because he was starting to come into his own as a disruptor up front, and not having Jason Red at corner since the season opener has had its effects as well, where they are now heavily relying on frickin' Josh Norman, who hasn't had a good season since his early time in Washington, I would say. They haven't allowed anybody to go bombs away on them, and they're just outside the top 10 in 3rd down percentage, but they've allowed teams to run the ball on them and stay ahead of the chains. Well, it's been a one-man show in terms of rushing the passer, where Nick Bosa has accounted for about half of the hits on the quarterback. Only the Jets, Jaguars, and Chiefs have a worse turnover differential than -6, and they have rapidly moved ahead of the competition with 77 penalty yards surrendered per game. So there's a lot of bad points here to bring up of San Francisco, especially in terms of beating themselves, and Arizona absolutely the advantage on paper, but this was a tight game back in week 5, where the Cardinals were held to just 10 points until scoring the decisive touchdown with about 5 minutes left. There's been a lot of pressure on this 49ers defense, being put on the field too much by the offense, turning the ball over, and or not sustaining drives. We saw them really improve in that area last week against Chicago, ending all 8 of their drives with kicks, since the first one was a missed field goal, and the 3 touchdowns were followed by PATs. A balanced, zone-oriented offense in the Packers gave Arizona trouble this past Thursday night when they were dethroned. However, quarterback has to be the difference here. Jimmy Garoppolo played pretty well this past Sunday, like I mentioned, but Kyle can eat this offense with off-script plays that the 49ers signal caller just can't even dream of. Kyle Shanahan will be desperate to get a statement win here, and I think the Niners will make this one close, which is why the line is moved into the pick'em range, but I can't quite pull the trigger on this one. Give them the Cardinals, winning on a field goal 23-20. Anything you believe in these 2 defenses, the under might be worth a look here if the line continues to move up. And that brings us to Sunday Night Football, where we have the 6-2 Tennessee Titans at the 7-1 LA Rams. Man, I hope Derrick Henry is fine. That guy has been an Iron Man, and it would just suck to not see him out there. And while I know he's a running back, I thought his loss will be huge on the line here, which it really hasn't been. Has moved by about a point, because otherwise there's no way the current number 1 seed in the AFC should be a touchdown underdog to anybody, even if it's arguably against the best team in the league right now, because the Titans are probably the hottest one. When you look at the stat sheet for the Titans, outside of 1 touchdown of like 75 yards, Opposing teams have held Derrick Henry in check actually, where looking at efficiency numbers, they've not really benefited from banging him into the line time and time again, which might have been his and their demise now, but just with how teams have needed to fit runs, it has opened up the middle of the field for the resurgence of AJ Brown, who has been eating in recent weeks. I believe Julio Jones as well is slated to come back this week, and thanks to the focus on pounding the rock to go along with some timely plays in tight games from Ryan Tannehill, Tennessee has the second highest time of possession at 32 minutes and 47 seconds, and they're just outside the top 5 in percentage of drives ending in points and average points per drive. The defense had a stand-up performance against the Chiefs, holding them to 3 points a couple of weeks ago, and getting after Mahomes all game long. I think they still have issues on the back end, where they're just very young and don't create as much confusion with hybrid looks as they've done in the past, but they've not taken the ball away 9 times over the last 4 games combined, after doing so just twice over the first month of the season. There's a lot of quiet contributors that don't really get the credit that they deserve for this unit, like Jeffrey Simmons, who crashed a quarterback sneak by Josh Allen and basically won that game, Tanico Autry, who they move all across the front in passing downs, and Harold Landry, who currently leads the entire NFL with 33 total pressures. On the other side, their only loss on the year came against the recently undefeated Cardinals, in a bit of a letdown spot after they had just dethroned the Bucs. Other than that, they've outscored their opponents by 94 points, and that includes allowing a meaningless 22 points given up in the fourth quarter just last week in a blowout win over the Texans. They still got some pretty big matchups ahead of them, but even with a trip to San Francisco before the bye on slate, this is another chance to make a statement and control their own destiny for the NFC's top seed. They're currently tied with Dallas for an NFL best 6.5 yards per play offensively. They're also tied for a league low in sacks and pressure percentage given up at just around 12%. However, while they're top 3 with 35 pass plays of 20 plus yards, and tied for first with 10 of those cracking the 40-yard mark, they've only had one stinking run of more than 20. So while the offense is morphed with Matt Stafford in the center, and it certainly has gotten better because of it, since outside of the currently injured Russell Wilson in yards per pass attempt, and he's also first in QBR, the offense has not been as balanced as it has been in the past. Defense is taking a step back from the dominant 2020 campaign, which was to be expected with the loss of coordinator Brandon Staley and just a variance on that side of the ball, but they lead the league with 25 sacks and just traded for a Super Bowl MVP in Von Miller, even if he's probably into the Marcus Ware stage of his career now, when that guy came over to Denver. So some of them standard numbers will tell you that they're not a very good defense, but they're still near the top in DVOA percentage, and the only 2 offenses to score 20 or more points against them this year were the Bucs and the Cardinals. And the difference between good and great teams is visible with the Rams only being penalized for 35 yards per game, which is the fewest in the league. If Derrick Henry was available for this contest, I think it would be a lot more interesting, and I thought there was some opening line value here originally, when the Rams were pretty much laying a touchdown already, but with the news of the superstar running back being out for a while, that changes quite a bit. I wanted to see if Tennessee could do in part what we saw from the Patriots against the other LA team just last week, when they attacked those 6-man boxes with a vertically oriented running approach, and I still believe that we'll see them try to do it here primarily, but getting a 36-year-old Adrian Peterson or young Jeremy McNichols breaking a 10-yard run versus King Henry, who can take those 70-80 yards to the house, makes a big difference. To go along with that, AJ Brown being primarily deployed in the slot means that he'll see a heavy dose of Jalen Ramsey shadowing him, who has the physicality to actually not allow the uber physical receiver to always dictate route stems, unlike almost any other DB in the league. The Rams have plenty of short passing game elements to slowing this emerging Titans pass rush to some degree, and their trio of receivers has the advantage across the board here, so I have to go with what I believe is the best team in football right now in the Rams, winning 31-23, just covering the spread and going over the number, so nothing that I really want to bet here. Which brings us to a final game, Monday Night Football, the 3-5 Bears going to Pittsburgh to take on the 4-3 Steelers. Pittsburgh favored by 6.5, over under set at 40 points. So finally, a matchup of 2 classic teams in the NFC and AFC respectively, which has been kind of the theme of the week, that have both had pretty challenging times with the offenses, but also some pretty dominant defensive performances. Chicago in particular would be the very worst offense in the league, if not for the rookie quarterback Justin Fields showing some promise as a playmaker, who the head coach ironically was hesitant to give the keys to. Rookie running back Khalil Herbert has been outstanding, and if they just open up the passing game a little bit, actually help Fields with more clever play design, I think the defense is good enough for them to be competitive. Following an embarrassing no-show performance against the Bucs, the Bears went out without Matt Nagy and had a legitimate shot at winning at San Francisco. They're starting to crawl out of that pit of misery, still averaging 0.4 yards per play less than the next closest team, and they're still far from effective in the pass game, while having to find ways to get the ball out of Fields' hands, even if he's certainly part of that, as they've given up a league-high 30 sacks on the year. They've run the ball effectively and a lot for most of the year, being one of only 2 teams, along with the Saints, to run it more than they throw it. And with Khalil Herbert becoming the first running back to rush for over 100 yards against Tampa Bay in like the last 2 years, while only the Browns and Ravens have had more explosive runs this season, the defense on the other hand has done a pretty good job for the most part, considering they faced 5 of the top 12 scoring offenses already, outside of those 2 really bad showings against the Rams and Bucks. They get home to the quarterback, being tied for 4th in sacks with 21, and some of the young defensive backs are showing growth in front of our very eyes. For the Steelers, they were completely dead a month ago when they were 1-3 with 3 straight losses from multiple possessions, but have now narrowly escaped against the Broncos, Seahawks and Browns, who all had quarterback issues to be fair, with Baker Mayfield's banged up shoulder being the smallest concern last Sunday. Once again, Najee Harris touching the ball 30 times for like 100 yards, and what they do through the air is anything but efficient, and Big Ben is just an old man at this point, moving at snail's pace when trying to extend plays, and being ahead of only Jared Goff and Mike White, with 4.4 average yards per completion. However, as we flip things around, TJ Watt has been a monster off the edge, and they can really pressure the quarterback, as they're top 3 in percentage of dropbacks being hurried, and they're also top 10 in 2 other categories that really matter, which are third down and red zone percentage, while having gotten less predictable in when they'll send extra pressure and when they'll bail out of it. They can pull off some wins in those defensive clashes, which doesn't really give them a lot of room for error, but they're 4-4 and seem to be able to get into those games that they like to play. Pittsburgh doesn't have an elite run-stopping defense, and I think Chicago will have a few nice plays on the ground, while the guys who have given them some trouble in the past have been those mobile quarterbacks that can extend plays and create voids in zone coverages late. Justin Fields has that capability, but if you get into the dropback pass game, the rookie won't be able to get out of those situations and punish the defense a whole lot. And while the Steelers probably won't be able to make the Bears put themselves in compromised positions, having to zero in on one area of the game, I don't see Big Ben being the first one to blink here and make that one big mistake where he forces the ball into double coverage, but rather he'll be content to check it down to Najee for a 10th time or hit Deontay Johnson or Shell Crosser. And since I give the advantage to Pittsburgh on special teams as well, and they might get a couple of short fields that way, I gotta go with the home team here. I have the Steelers winning 22-16. Nothing that I'm super confident in terms of a betting perspective, because of how low the total is set already, but I think this will be a defensive game. And that will do it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with a friend or 2, that would really help me out. And I truly believe there's no more detailed weekly preview video out there, even if other people may have a more fancy setup or something like that. If you want to support me and the work that I do, just follow me on social media, which the links for all of those outlets are on the screen right now and in the video description, would be an easy way to do so. I also put out a short video analysis every week on a play or a player that really stood out to me from the weekend, my rework game picks on Sunday, and betting lines that I like, along with just my general thoughts, and you can always hit me up there as well. I will have my mid-season NFL Awards article out on my page at footballtalk.com midway through next week, where I give you my top 3 candidates once again for all different categories, just like I did before the season kicked off. Make sure to check that out and let me know your thoughts. So until then, see you later. Peace!